Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me this lovely sunny, is it sunny outside? It's lovely sunny afternoon here in South Wales. My name's Andrew Berry and we, as Louise is with us on the chat box as well. We'll be taking some of your questions and hopefully I'll be able to provide you some decent answers. So I think we've had quite a few questions already, haven't we? We've had quite a few people come on already and ask us a lot of questions. So do you want to kick us off? Kick us off with one.
Dazzles is asking, when working on a wax carving and making charms, would you recommend waiting until it has been cast in silver before soldering a jump ring?
Depends on the design, I think. It's going to be very hard for you to recreate a perfect jump ring onto your wax. So I think what I would try and do is produce the wax, because then that will be your master that I would expect you're going to cast from, perhaps. So I would do the wax first. Once you get the wax and then the casting done, then I would solder on a little jump ring onto that metal, your master, and from that then you can do your room temperature vulcanizing, or your vulcanizing with your rubber, or even perhaps try and do some delft clay with it, because that then will be your master, and then everyone then that you produce after that will have a perfect jump ring on the top. If you're just making it just the one little charm or one-off, yes, I would still do that again. I wouldn't try and recreate a jump ring in silver, in wax, because you're never going to make it absolutely perfect. I would cast the piece if you're making the one-off, and then I would solder the little jump ring on afterwards. You're going to get a far better result if you do it that way. Hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Next one. Yep.
This next one's from Helly. Hi, Helly. Could you share some tips for a beginner trying flush setting 2 millstones in silver? I've got the seat drilled okay, but the burnishing / polishing stage went wrong.
Okay, so there's you do need a very fine tipped burnisher for getting down. I've got some diagrams I've drawn beforehand. A very fine pointed burnisher. Now I make mine out of some old some burnishers. I have far too many drawers here at the moment. Yes, I do have burnishers. We've got this type of burnisher. Point for this. So what you would do, I've drawn some diagrams by here. Down, but also then spin it, and the edge of the burnisher then will catch physically getting the burnisher on top here and pushing, wrong way, on camera, there we go. should just burnish that edge over. Make sure the burnisher is nicely highly polished. Make sure the point is nice and smooth as well, because if you've got a very, very small...
No problem, thank you guys.
Yep.
There's no sound on the close-up camera.
Thank
you, everybody.
Good one, yes. Thank you. Okay, let's have a look, see if I can rectify that. There we go. Try that. How's that? Is that better? Is everyone can hear the close-up camera now? Yeah, close-up camera working.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's close-up.
Some feedback.
Yeah, should be okay now.
Yes, yeah, great.
Okay, sorry, I do apologise for that. Thank you. So yeah, so the burnisher would come in at an angle here, at this angle, to come all the way around, go around the stone. Some people will come, people will come vertical and try and do this, but I always try and just angle the burnisher on the edge, just to burnish that edge down onto the edge of the stone. Sorry about the mess up there, I do apologise. So that's basically how you would get it. And then because you've got a nice polished edge to the burnisher, it will produce a nice burnished edge, polished edge all the way around the edge of the bezel. Good question. Thank you so much indeed for that. Good. I apologise for the sound problem there. Louise, next question.
Sorry, just checking on an echo. I've got a report of an echo.
Okay, it's most probably because of that camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Where was I? Part 2 from Helly. Have you ever tried marker seat setting? This seems to be a bit of a lost art, but keen to give that a try.
Marker seats is as in, so the back is flat. I've never really tried it. I've never had the need to try it. I don't really know. I'm sure there must be some special birds out there that will produce a flat bottom, but with straight sides. No, I'd have to say no, I've never tried it, and I don't know how. You'd have to have perhaps a special flat bottom drill, I think, for that. I don't know. I really don't know. So I do apologize. That's one question you've actually stumped me on. So I do apologize for that. So no, sorry, I can't answer you. Sorry. But I will find out some information for you. Don't worry. Don't worry.
This is a question from Darren. What is the best way to make a Euro shank flat bottom ring?
Let me have a think. You may get some echo now because we're on a different camera here. So as in a ring shank, but with a flat bottom, so perhaps like sort of that sort of shape. Is it that sort of edge? I guess that's what you mean in that sort of respect. If that's what you mean by a Euro shank, you can, the easiest way to do that would be to grab your mandrel. And I'm not going to do it on this wedding ring, Louise, don't worry. It's come off here. So what you would do is get the band that way. You would then mark off your positions, your quarter positions here, here, and here. Then you would just simply get a nice polished hammer. Where's a nice polished hammer? Here we go. A nice polished hammer. And then you would literally hammer a flat across that one edge there. I'm just touching the ring, Louise, it's okay. And then you would turn the ring round and you'd hammer on this side. And by hammering against the metal, you then, will produce, you will then produce the flats that you would require. Here. It will spread the metal. So then what you would do is just get the ring on the side and then file the ring flat and into the same width. The same width into the same proportions. But by doing that, you can then be sure that the shank is nice. And in fact, I've got a bangle. Bear with me a second. I may be able to show you what I mean. If I can quickly find the bangle in my display cabinet. No, I can't. No, I can't. I do apologize. No, but that's the best way that I think you're going to be able to get a nice Euro style shank. You can obviously come along and file it if you wanted to, but by filing it, you do lose quite a bit of metal, but by hammering it, you're going to shape it. It's going to make it slightly bigger as well, so you have to allow for a couple of sizes difference. You have to make it by a couple of sizes smaller, then you hammer it and the metal will stretch. But I think that would be your best way of doing that.
Okay, this one is from Mike. When casting silver, what are your attempts for filigree and heavy patterns? Having trouble with porosity?
I don't really try and cast anything too fine. We've got the centrifugal caster and we've got a vacuum casting machine as well. I think I haven't got my chart, but I know my kiln is programmed, so I never even have to look at it anymore. I think it comes down to, now I may be wrong, but I think it comes down to around about 500 degrees. And it holds it at 500 degrees for a little while. It is slightly below obviously the melting point of silver. Porosity, yeah, we do get some porosity as well. Again, I think that's down to temperature, but I really can't give you a definite figure. We don't try and cast anything too fine either, because we'll get a few problems. I think we were casting some pendants just yesterday or the day before yesterday, and I think the back plate was about 1/3 of a millimeter, and that was just touching it. I think there's one or two that actually didn't cast because the metal was just too thin. So I think I'll have to report back to you, but I think it's 500 degrees, but I'll have to report back to you on that one. Yes, please.
This is a question from Lee, who's asking, when did you start making jewellery and why?
Lee, our youngest viewer, I think, Lee is. When did I make it? When did I start? Why? When and why? It's a good question. I think I talked about this on a question and answer a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying about how I went to university not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do. And one of the lecturers was a silversmith by the name of Harry Marlin. I think he's dead by now. Not by now, but it's a while ago now. And he was really good. He was very enthusiastic about his craft. And I think any sort of teacher or a lecturer that becomes really enthusiastic rubs off then onto fellow students who want to absorb that sort of knowledge. I just got really interested in it, and I just liked the complexities of the pieces that you can make, or the simplicities. We were doing woodwork at the same time as well, but I felt that you couldn't get the same detail with wood. You saw a bit of wood, that's it, you've had it. But with metal, you can sort of solder bits onto it, though you can glue wood. I was never happy with wood. It was always worked too fast for me. Metal is absolutely great, and it just came from there, really. I just like the complexities of the pieces. You can do simple settings, complex settings. You can make flat pieces. You can bend metal. You can cast it. You can shape it. It'll spread. It'll go and be formed in different directions. That's what I seem to like about the metal side of it, and then just really went from there, really. I just got enthusiastic, and we had books at that particular time. Sylvia Wicks was the first book I ever bought on making jewelry, and just really got into it from there. But it's a very enthusiastic teacher. Really does help. If you have somebody who doesn't really care and lets you get on with your own devices, well, then what you're going to do. But you have a lecturer or a teacher that really does sort of concentrate upon what you're doing and shows you examples, and you see him or her working. I think that's a great sort of inspiration, and that's really how I sort of started. Yes.
Sorry, stop now.
Yeah. So I think that's how and why. That's how I started, and that's why I started. Yeah. That was back sort of, when was that? When I was 19, 20. You can hear beeping, can you? Okay.
Okay. Sandy is asking, what is the best way to solder a 2x3 inch cab bezel to a backplate? Can't seem to get the larger cabs flat.
A lot of people would tell you to clamp the bezel onto the backplate. Some people will use these little clamps made from titanium strips, and you can use those to gently push down. Some people will use binding wire to bind the whole thing down onto the back plate. I don't tend to use any of those because you've only got to have a little bit too much pressure on that bezel, and the bezel will perhaps bend, it'll warp. Too much pressure going in, not down, but a slight direction will perhaps move the bezel and perhaps misshapen the bezel. So I would never use anything to clamp that bezel down upon the back plate. I would make sure that the bottom of the bezel is perfectly flat. First of all, using something like a little steel block like this, which would be ideal. Piece of emery paper on your bench and just gently go over, but the bottom does have to be perfectly flat. The piece of metal then that you're soldering it on top of, has to be perfectly flat as well. Perfectly clean, no oil marks, no stains, no oxidization or anything like that. And all I would do is place the bezel on top and put plenty of flux inside and out. When you heat up the piece, the flux will all bubble up and it'll push the bezel up. But usually then, most often the case, the bezel will come back down and it'll rest back on top of the metal. If you find you do have a slight gap, well then just grab another pair of tweezers and just gently use the back of the tweezers just to push that bezel back down into place should there be a gap. But usually there is no gap because your solder comes around and then the flux then becomes that lovely glassy sort of liquidy, and it'll just come back down and it should touch the base. As I said, just ease it down with a pair of tweezers. If it doesn't, don't try and fill it with solder. Solder will fill sort of slight gaps, but you put too much solder into it and you're going to have problems at a later stage. So that's my tip. Some people would use things like third hands, but the pressure on those is just far too great. And even the bezel, especially if you're using fine silver, that bezel may collapse. And you don't want anything to alter that perfect shape of that bezel, because you spend ages trying to get that bezel together. So that would, to me, would be the best way of doing it. And perhaps also heat up the back plate from underneath if you possibly can, because then the heat isn't going to be generated around and concentrated on top of the bezel. The heat will be transferred from the underneath onto the bezel, which then should make an absolutely fantastic joint. But yeah, just gently ease that bezel down into place, and I think you should have no problems at all. No problems at all. Yes, Louise.
Part two to that question from Sandy is, what is the best way to attach a bail onto a bezel with and without a back plate?
I think what I would be inclined, there's two different ways that we could approach this. We could have our soldering block and put the bezel flat on the soldering block. And then if you've got like a bail or a jump ring, you could stand it up on the edge, or use a third hand, bring the third hand into position just to hold on to that bail ever so slightly on the very tips. You're going to have to get the sound sorted on this. Get the bail right on the edge here. So then you'd have your, let me improvise here. There we go. Let me use the bottom of this. So there we go. So that's my bezel. There, that's my bezel. Little jump rings. Going to solder something from here. Put your bail into your third hand, and then just bring the bezel into place so it's just touching. What I'd also advise you to do is to pre-solder. Put a little bit of solder onto that bail first of all. Melt it on the end. So then when you bring your bezel into place, the solder is already on that spot. And as you heat up the bezel here, the heat will be transferred to the jump ring or to the bail, and the solder then will just flow exactly when you need it. That would be the best bet when it comes to that. Alternatively, you could always stand up your bezel and then get your third hand and put it this way and get your third hand into position with the bail on the top. And again, you can get that absolutely perfectly right. You can then get that bail perfectly straight as well. And again, pre-solder that bail, a little bit of solder on the contact point where it's going to touch the bezel. And I think that'll be absolutely perfect. Don't heat the bail, don't heat the jump ring, but use the heat that comes up from the bezel to be transferred through to the bail, and then it should be soldered. Don't forget, you do need to reflux that joint as well when you come to solder it. I think those two ways are going to be the best. If you lie it down this way, you can lie the bail down. You can get up like this. You can check the bail is absolutely symmetrical, exactly where you want it. I think those two ways are going to be the best ways to put a bail onto a bezel. Thank you.
Jade is asking, did you make your wedding rings, and have you made any other special jewellery for family members?
I didn't make my wedding ring. Louise made my wedding ring, and obviously then I made hers, and they're out of platinum. So yes, we did make them. And then we rolled down the platinum, and we shaped them, we soldered them. You had a bit of help, didn't you?
Minimal.
She did a very good job. It's a bit scratched. We need to repolish them. Yeah, and also made Louise's engagement ring as well, which I will get off her.
Finger onto the ring.
You haven't done your nails, you said, so we're not. This will become nice and close on this. So yeah, this is just a nice, simple, straightforward full eternity ring, diamond set eternity ring. Nice, nothing fancy. Nice and simple, absolutely gorgeous. Paired up with a nice plain platinum band. It looks absolutely stunning. So yeah, so that's my kit. I've also made up a couple of items for my mother as well, like a Celtic knot bracelet as well. I think I made that up for my mother. But I don't normally make up a lot of jewellery for octopus. Oh, that's, yeah, I did. Yeah, I made a gorgeous octopus ring as well. You haven't got that on today, have you? No, I made this gorgeous white gold octopus ring, and in some of the tentacles, I put some black diamonds as well. Again, that's Louise's as well, and that looks really nice, doesn't it? That's really unusual. So yeah, so I've done that, and I've also made my kids some bits and pieces as well. But that's about it. That's about it. But yeah, it was a good question. Thank you. Next question.
Lynn is asking, can you describe your method for achieving a satin finish on silver? And if you do anything to preserve that finish, is there any difference to achieving a rough and rustic as opposed to smooth and refined?
A nice satin finish. You can get Scotch Brite wheels, little, like the scourers that you use when you do your washing up. You can get something like that on a little 2.35 or 3mm sort of shank. You can use that to get a bit of a satin finish. It does tend to be quite directional because the direction of the brush is going in one direction. You can also buy, I'll just run down a minute and get it. You can also buy some wheels with little loose wires on. So as it comes round, it hits the piece, and that produces real nice satin finish. Depends on how fast you turn that around. Depends on the finish. In fact, I'll go down and get one of those wheels because they're really, really good. The other way that I would do it is, again, you get some rough sandpaper, so like a 60 grit, and just gently go over the piece. Again, that's going to be a bit directional as well, unless you sort of do it in all different directions. The satin finishes, especially on wedding bands, we have a lot of people wanting brushed wedding bands, but we find that due to the constant wear of the rings, the pattern gets burnished and it wears off. So a brushed pattern does have to be put on from time to time when it wears off. Obviously in recessed areas, it doesn't burnish off, but on the high spots, it does. That would be the best way to get like a satin finish. To preserve it, I don't think you can, because it's there through wear, then it's going to wear off. You could get some Renaissance wax, but that isn't really going to protect the surface from wear. That's only going to protect the surface from oxidization if you're using some silver. Let me just run down and get that wheel. I'll literally be about 20 seconds. Do you want to have a chat? And I'll put the camera on you while I go. No? All right. I'll just have a look at the look at the backdrop. But this should be 20 seconds. And you better hear me because I count. Go on, count.
20, 3, 2.
Right. Whew. Okay, so this is the wheel I was talking about. So this is the wheel. Oh, as you can see, it spins. And as your metal is here, as these pins come round, they will hit the piece. Does that make sense? As there's a spin, you mustn't do it very fast. Always wear eye protection. Excuse me. And that will produce a nice, almost like a very satin, like a slightly battered finish. These are really good. You can get them in different thicknesses of wire. The finer the wire, the finer the pattern. The thicker the wire, the thicker and the more aggressive the pattern would be. Don't get your fingers in the way. You can mask off areas using some thick masking tape or double laser masking tape, but this is something that we use quite a bit. We do like this. It's really, really good. That's about the best thing for satin finish, I think. You can get like a scratch finish, as I said, using emery paper, some coarse emery paper, but these sort of bad boys, or you could use a little glass fiber brush to produce a very, very fine matte finish, a brushed finish. But again, it's going to come off because it just wears in the natural burnishing action against wood and door handles and cutlery and that sort of thing. But you won't be able to keep it on there forever. It'll always have to be reapplied in one way or another. But these little bad boys, really, really good, really good. Oh, I can get my breath back. I have a glass of water now. Yes, Louise, what's next? Make it a long question. Okay.
Lena is asking, can you make a film on At the Bench on how to set a hexagon stone? Hexagonal,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll make note of that.
Yeah, okay. And also, do I need to prepare the furnace melting crucible when I use it for the first time?
Are you talking about the little bench mounted furnaces with a little graphite crucible that goes in it? No, you don't need to add anything really to that graphite crucible at all. You shouldn't need to add any borax or any flux to it whatsoever, because it's graphite. You've got to be really, really careful with it as well. When you put your metal into it, never have, let me demonstrate this again for you. Don't bother counting. I'm not even going to walk for this one. It's only in the other room, this one. There we go. So this is the graphite crucible that we've been using. And so I don't bother about that, can't go on this one. So what I'd be inclined to do is that I would always have the crucible at an angle like this, and then put your silver or gold down so it runs down to the bottom. Never have it vertical and drop things into the top. Really, really fragile. What you're going to find, you're going to crack the bottom is going to come off. So always have the crucible at an angle and roll your pieces down slowly into the bottom. But you don't have to do anything to it. As you can see, my hands are actually stinking now from this. So do take good care with it. But no, you don't need to season it or do anything at all with it. I'll just put this back a second because I don't want to put it down in case it falls over. Okay, no, so filth to it. Go on, read out the next question, though. They should be able to. No, go on. Yep.
This is from Maureen, who's wondering about a mitre jig / vice. Do you use one? Do you recommend it? And how and when do you use it?
Really nice pieces of equipment, these. I don't have one. They are similar to. I got far too much storage in this place. They're similar to this. This is just simply a very guillotine, this one is. But it's very, very similar to this, where you've got like a square holes or round holes, and then you've got them at 45 degrees as well. Really good. They're very good and very good for getting perfect 90-degree angles. They're brilliant for getting perfect like 60, 45 and 30-degree angles as well for round and for square wire. I think they're not that cheap. I think they're about 70 or 80 pounds. They are really good if you do have you do need to have wire absolutely perfect all the time. If you're going to be using it for making sure that the ends of your, say, ring shanks come together, there would be no need, and there'd be no need to have them either if you are putting together your bezels, where your bezel wire comes together. I wouldn't even bother getting one for that. you can simply pass your saw blade through those joints to get perfect faces. But if you're having to put together a design where you've got you have to have like a 45-degree angle, or if you exactly want 90-degree angles on two pieces, and that is so important, well then yes, perhaps I would invest in one. But I haven't got one. I'm interested in buying one, but it's not a necessity for me. I feel that I can get the same sort of results by simply using a tri-square like this, or by using, I should label these drawers because it's here somewhere, or by using a, there we go, a cutter, a tube cutter, joint cutter, I think they're called, like this here, because the piece of wire can go in from here, like that. You pull this over to hold it in place, and then you just simply file this flat, and that would get a nice 90-degree edge. Obviously, I have that, and if you don't have that, well then use a tri-square. That's all you would really need for getting 90 degrees. But yeah, I will buy one eventually when I see the need to buy one. But if you want to go and buy one, they're absolutely brilliant. Getting accurate joints. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yes, Louise.
Helly would like some advice on finishing a tube stone setting for a professional finish.
Okay, so if it's soldered onto a flat sheet, I would always make sure that that flat sheet is perfectly polished, no scratches beforehand, because the less amount of polishing you've got to do when it's complete, the better. You don't want to go soldering onto a back plate where it has all scratches, or you simply use quite a coarse bit of emery paper on it, and you've got to try and polish it. I always try and think, and this is what I always say on At the Bench, is always try and think of the next stage. If you're working on something now, what is the next stage? Okay, say perhaps I've got to solder a piece of tubing onto a piece of sheet. If I do that, can I polish correctly? Can I do the next step even after that correctly by soldering it and doing it now? If you're going to have a problem, do something now before you do that next step. So what I would do if you're soldering onto a ring or a brooch or a back plate, something like that, make sure that that plate has been polished first of all, so you don't have to try and get scratches out at a later stage because you've got them out whilst you can easily polish the whole back plate, instead of having to try and polish around the tube once you soldered it onto the plate. If you do have to try and polish around the plate, especially after you've soldered it, you're going to lose some of that shine. But just to bring that shine back up, I always recommend these little natural, no, they're not natural, I don't like the natural ones. These are the white nylon brushes. Here we go. That I do love these. These are absolutely gorgeous white nylon brushes. You can use goat's hair brushes, you can use natural bristle brushes, and you can use this then to go around, and these will conform to the shape of where that tube is fastened onto the back plate or a ring. You can get around in all the nooks and crannies. And again, if you're soldering that tube onto the back plate, make sure that tube is clean, make sure that tube is being polished, make sure everything that you've needed to do to that tube has been done before you solder it on. Easier to clean a tube when it's in your hand. You've got a larger piece that you can gain access all the way around. Same with the back plate. So always think of the next step. That would be your best bet. And then get something like a nice soft woolen mop, like this one here. This kind of bit of wear, and use a little bit of rouge with that to come around the outside as well. So always think in advance. Just don't try and put everything together and then go, oh, damn me, I should have polished that up beforehand, or I can't get a good finish because I rushed it. But always think of the next step, and you should really produce some really fantastic results if you can do that. Yes, Louise.
Susan is asking, please talk about open back bezels and the tips and mistakes that can happen.
Open back bezels. There are several ways you can make an open back bezel. You can simply have a piece of bearing wire that is that sort of shape, like that, and then your stone then would fit in here on the side. That's a nice way of having like an open back. The other way would be to have a wire, simply solder onto a back plate. I can actually draw this. There we go. So there's my bezel. Where we to? I'm going to take this wider. There we go. Okay, so that's a bit wide. Okay, so there's the bezel. There's that there. There's the bezel coming around. And you can solder on the inside a little wire. Again, exactly the same way. Or solder the bezel upon a back plate and then cut a section out of that back plate. Whichever way you want to do it, it really doesn't matter too much. What are the problems? You've got to make sure the stone doesn't fall out. So especially if you've got a very thin ledge on your bearing wire, you've got to make sure that this ledge is ample so the stone doesn't drop down. You can do some nice action, some nice cutouts as well. Let me just go and show you. I've got a lovely, if I can find it in my hang on a minute, in my display cabinet. How does that look? Oh, there, that's nice. I like that. That's nice. How are we counting? There's an open back as well. I should have prepared all this, shouldn't I, beforehand? There's some open backs to show you. There we go. Okay, so here's some open backs that I've done in the past. A simple sort of snowflake obsidian on some bezel wire, soldered onto a back plate. Let's make that back plate. Yeah, I think I cut that out of a sheet by the looks of that, or did I? I can't remember. Anyway, twisted wire on the outside, nice simple back. That's a bit boring, but what I did on this one here, a little like a lace agate, but on the back of this one, I echoed the same design on the back of that. So yeah, heart shape, a bit more of a feature. And I was trying to find another one I did that's absolutely gorgeous, but just don't simply have a gap like this. This is quite an easy way out. Do something a bit more creative, because don't forget, it's always nice not only to have a look at a piece from the front, but also to have a nice look from the back. If you've got a nice plain area upon the back, do something nice, pierced design, have the shape in the center echoing the outline of the shape. Not much really to worry about too much, but if your back of your stone is not perfectly flat and it's slightly convex, well, then you can't have a complete flat back. So a stepped bezel would be ideal to allow for the bottom of that stone just to stick below the bottom of this area by here. So you have a stone that is not flat backed, but has a slight belly on the bottom, a shallow edge would be your best bet for that. But yeah, just try and make it be nice and creative with the open work in the back, and it would be really, really gorgeous, because someone actually won't then realize that until they actually turn the piece around and go, oh, it's nice. They paid a bit of attention to that. So that's what I'd advise you to do. Just have a bit of imagination and come up with some nice sort of open work, fret work on the back, and practice your piercing at the same time. Easy. Yes, Louise.
This is from Julia. I'm experimenting with making bangles and rings using copper and silver. Will polishing cause copper particles to be pushed to the surface of the silver? And if so, how do I avoid this?
I would always try and keep separate mops for copper especially, because yes, the copper does come off onto the mops. You put your silver onto it then, and then the silver does slightly become impregnated, especially if you push quite hard, especially if you're using a calico mop, which is quite a hard mop. That's a bit more abrasive, especially if you're using a pre-polish. So I'd always try and keep a separate mop. And people will have separate mops for gold, have separate mops for silver, and you should definitely have a separate mop if you're using platinum especially. So yes, keep separate mops, try not to cross-contaminate the mops. And if you've got a silver and a gold, a silver and a copper soldered together, well, then you can't really avoid that, can you? So you just have to be very, very careful, but try not to polish too hard. Do all your work with emery paper beforehand to try and get a nice finish on it. So when you come to polish it, you don't have to put too much pressure and too much effort into it, because you don't want to be removing too much copper, because then it may be then passed on to the silver. So just make sure that it's a nice, clean finish before you go on to the mops, and don't ask the mops to do too much work, especially if you've got them side by side. But if they're separate, great. Keep your mops separate. They're only a few dollars for each one. Get the biggest mops that you can get in diameter that'll fit on your polishing machine, and keep them separate. I don't keep silver and gold separate, to be honest. I keep platinum mops separate, yes, and anything that is not silver or gold, well, then I do keep separate as well for polishing those. But I don't use those that often. But yeah, keep your mop separate. If you do get it impregnated, go back over the silver with some emery paper just to try and remove some surface, and then go back through the finer grits, and then just dedicate that little area on a dedicated mop. And you really should have no problems at all. No problems at all.
Yeah, this is a question from Len. What's a good way to judge how much solder to use on a joint, and does hammering solder thinner make it flow easier?
So that's the last bit of the question. First, if you hammer it, it does not necessarily make it flow any easier. By hammering or putting your solder through a rolling mill to make it thinner is a lot better for you, because when you come then to use your snips, your shears to cut little sections off it, they don't go flying all over the place, and it's a lot easier to cut. Plus, that way you get a good indication of how much solder you actually need. If you've got a piece of solder and it's in the region of sort of like, how thick this is, about 0.5 millimeter thick silver, and you have say a 2 millimeter piece, that's actually quite a big piece. But you hammer this down to half that thickness and you have a 2 millimeter piece, not only can you see it and handle it easier, you'll obviously have less solder. And how much solder do you need? It's a good question. A lot of people will use too much solder, but I always err on the side of having a little bit extra solder, just to make sure that solder will flow all the way around. If you're soldering together the faces of a ring shank, for instance, in theory, all you need is as much solder to cover the face of where you're actually soldering, of the thinnest amount. So perhaps I would get some solder. What thickness is this solder? This solder is, it's 0.6 millimeter. So perhaps I would roll that down or hammer it down to at least perhaps 0.2 millimeter. Then I would then cut enough metal. So say I was joining a ring shank that came round. So here's the ring shank here, and here's the ring shank coming around here. Does that make sense? So then all I would need is a piece of solder that big, in theory. That's all where you want the solder to go. You don't really want the solder to flow anywhere else, just on that face. So that's all I would do it, and make it as thin as possible. As I said, it's easier to pick it up, it's easier to position it than trying to get tiny little pallions of solder when they're quite thick. Was that the question? Does that answer the question then? How much solder is too much? Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, I got that question. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Next question.
Andreas is asking, could you show simplest tool or way to bend round hollow tube into a circle without creasing it?
Yes, in my cupboard by there. Bear with me. Sorry, Louise, this time. No, it's okay. Let's have a look, see if I've got them to hand. Let me see if we go. You can buy some of these springs. Oops, easy. Right, okay. Some of these little springs like this that you can use. These are little tube bends and springs. And you can put these, I think you can put these on the inside of tube and on the outside, and you can bend the tube into position. Then you can pull these off your piece. That would be an ideal way of doing it. There are lots of other ways that people say you can do it. Some people will say you need to cap off one end. You can put sand into the tube, cap off the other end and solder a disc over the other end so there's sand inside the tube. Then you can bend it to the shape you want, cut off the one end, take the sand out. That's one way. Other people will say put water into the tube and freeze it, and then you can bend it, because that is stopping the tube actually compressing and going in on itself. So that's one of the best ways that I know. These I've used a little bit, and I've had some limited success with these. That's about the best way. Some people have used flour on the inside of tubes. What you don't want to do is to really get a pair of pliers and hold the pliers really, really hard. Sometimes you can even just bend it gently around the outside of a mandrel, providing the thickness of the wall is sufficient that it doesn't crease on itself. But again, make sure it's nicely annealed, make sure it's nice and soft as you possibly can, and you should be able to have a limited amount of success by just simply bending it around a mandrel. But these little springs, you can buy these, I think you buy these from like a model makers for doing little models and that sort of thing. Just simply little springs that you pass the metal either inside the spring or put the spring inside, and you can bend it with no problems at all. How's that? Good. Okay, next question.
Tanya is just starting out and would like to know what are the basic tools that she needs, please.
Okay, I'm actually putting together a bit of a tool list on At the Bench of sort of the tools that you need. That comes in around about £200, sort of like $250, $300, and it's basically like a starter toolkit, depending on what you'll need, because everybody's needs are going to be different. Some people are going to want to start to shape and hammer metal, bend metal. Some people can want to just simply cut out metal. Some people are going to want to solder. But a basic toolkit that I would put together would be a ruler, always important, whether it be a 12-inch or a 6-inch ruler. A scribe, you don't need a center punch, just need a scribe for marking out the metal. A saw, it can be any type of saw, a basic saw, not necessarily one like this, which is your new concept saw, a basic, simple saw, a fixed saw frame. There we go, something like that one there. Pliers, I would need round nose, I would need flat nose, I would need dissection, so one of the jaws is slightly rounded, the other side is flat. What else do I need? Some cutters, some top cutters or side cutters, something like that one there. Pair of shears for cutting metal and also for cutting your solder. What else could we have? You could not necessarily need a tri-square, but they're quite useful. So what have we got? We got a method of measuring metal. How about some dividers? Always handy to get a pair of dividers. So we can mark the metal, cut it, we can saw it, we can bend it, we can shape it. If you want to make rings, you have something like a ring mandrel, something like this one here. This has got the ring sizes. In the UK, we go from A to Z and Z plus 6. This is very handy. You also need a rawhide mallet. Always have a rawhide mallet, absolutely brilliant, because you can hammer the metal quite hard without damaging the metal. Something like a rawhide mallet or a rubber-faced mallet would be ideal. Files, I would just simply get a ring file like this one here, rounded on the outside but flat on the other side. What cut? Medium cut. What's that? 2-stroke-o, 3-stroke-o, something like that, a medium cut. Needle files. Don't necessarily need a like Valorbe, very expensive needle files. I've just simply got mine in a little pouch here and they're all together. Not the ideal storage solution, but some needle files would be great. What else? Buff sticks, some emery paper, some buff sticks, something like this, which is just simply a piece of wood with some emery paper wrapped around it for finishing the metal. That's, I think, all you're really going to need for shaping. I think that would be it. If I have forgotten something, I apologize. If you come then to solder and want to solder, you'd need something like a soldering block, a little handheld butane torch that can be refilled from lighter fuel. I always use then something like a borax cone for the flux, a little bit of safety pickle that you can pick up, or you can use some citric acid. And definitely a pair of tweezers. Have a couple of pairs of tweezers, always handy, and a third hand. I think that's really all you're really going to need an awful lot. Yes, and if you've got bad eyes, Louise is gesturing to me, and if you've got bad eyes... Oh, that's eye protection. Yes, eye protection, always good. Yes, have to have eye protection when you're soldering. Ideally, you should. Your PPE, is it? PPE, thank you. And also, if you've got bad eyes, a bit like me, one of these little lock devices, absolutely brilliant. What size is this? What magnification is this? This is a 4, absolutely brilliant. You could spend more and more and more money. You could go into like a Dremel or a pendant motor or a flex shaft, and then you can look at burrs and mops. But I think for the basics, that's all you're really going to need. I'm just looking through some of my drawers. Do I need anything else? Saw blades, obviously you're going to need. A hammer, you can always get a hammer. That's always good because you can always a metal hammer, have it with a ball pen, have it rounded on the other end like this, because then that's going to be really good for producing patterns onto metal as well. I think that's about it. I think all that would come into roughly around about £200, say $280, $300. I'm actually putting together a list on At the Bench as we speak on places where you can get these kits from and what sort of prices. So if you remember At the Bench, keep an eye on it. We're going to be going through the starter kits that you're going to need. Excellent. Make it a long question. Louise, I'm going to put all this away now.
Okay, this is Julia. If I have jewellery made of sterling silver only, no settings or anything, is there any benefit to repeatedly annealing to bring a layer of fine silver to the surface? Will this make it tarnish less?
It's a good idea. It will produce a gorgeous fine silver on the surface, which is, as you know, if there's fine silver, in theory, it should not tarnish, but I think it'll wear as you're going to be, especially say you made a ring. It's called depletion. You heat it up, put it in the acid, it gets rid of a layer of copper from the surface. You heat it up again, you put it in the acid and so forth. It produces a lovely, gorgeous white layer. You can try and polish it. I think if you do try and polish it, you may start to polish it away, unless you get a nice thick layer. And that's like a fraction of a millimeter, and just use a gentle cloth on it. But I think the general wear and tear of a piece of jewelry will slowly wear it away over time, and you'll be back then down to the sterling silver. Yes, will eventually sort of come along and start to tarnish. So it is a good idea, and I think it would last for a little while, but I think it will wear off over time. You can always try and use something, as I said, Renaissance wax over the surface, but these are only temporary measures. You can't stop a piece from tarnishing, I don't think, totally, because you wear a ring or a pendant, maybe rubbing back and forth on your blouse. You may have, I don't know, earrings that are in the ears and so forth. That's going to wear, and it's going to wear away that fine layer. So try it, see how you get on with it. It'd be interesting to know how long a piece would last if you depleted the surface. But yeah, it's a good question, interesting one. That made me think that one. Made me think. Yes, Louise. Next question.
Nancy is asking, how can I get the bottom of a bezel to easily fit a ring shank? I'm not good at doing it by eye alone.
Okay, so there are ways you can simply get, if it's a flat-backed setting, you can then have the metal just coming up to it. So can you repeat the question again, please, Louise? Yeah.
How can I get the bottom of a bezel to easily fit a ring shank? I'm not good at doing it by eye alone.
Okay, so let me just get my bit of paper. I think if you're looking at, say you got a, say a collet, like that there, and your stone will actually fit in here, like that, and you want to produce a ring shank that comes up to either side, like that. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can get your half round file that is that shape, and use the teeth, and you can file away that shape that you've got there. That's one way that you can sort of get the bottom, and you have to do that by eye. Or if you've got some sanding drums like these here that have this bit of a natural shape to them, you could use that in your flex shaft to grind away or wear away the bottom of the bezel. Alternatively, let me just try and work this out in my head. How can I draw this? Yeah, so this now is the bottom. So you'd have your bezel here, and your stone goes in here. You make a slit in the side of the bezel like that, and then the ring shank would pass through it. So the ring shank would pass through that. That would come round like that. Does that make sense? So this is your ring shank here, and this is your ring shank here. So you've got a little shape that's actually in the bezel. This fits over the top, and then you can then simply use your file again, just a file underneath. Again, a ring file would be ideal with that, but it really does have to be done by eye. And also then look at the side of the ring when you come to have a look at it, and make sure the continuation of the shank goes all the way around the underneath. Look at it from both sides, because if you file correctly from one side, you may not file correctly to the other side. So always turn the ring around 180 degrees and just check that continuation that flows all the way around the ring shank, and make sure it doesn't come up and stop and go across. So those would be the best ways, I think, to get a nice rounded bottom to your bezel. Yes, Louise,
we're running out of time. There's a couple of things people have brought up. Somebody has asked, do you read the questions on here after the programme? Because there are so many questions that we haven't been able to answer. We've just run out of time again. So
we do go through them. We find that I think perhaps what we should do, I think this might be an idea.
I always feel sorry for the people who come on a bit later or ask their questions later, because a lady has asked some really interesting questions about learning and development and career pathways, that sort of thing. So, I mean, you could talk about that all day, but it's...
Okay, so I think perhaps what we could do is go through all the questions and answers, perhaps over the last month, and go through all the questions, perhaps not every single one, but go through quite a few and produce perhaps, again, just a series of films that perhaps we can prepare some stuff beforehand to do. So it wouldn't necessarily be a live... Yeah, it would. Yeah, exactly right. So it wouldn't be a live broadcast. It would be a recorded one where we can go through step by step, and then perhaps when we come to broadcast that film, perhaps we can put down your names on the bottom so you can see if your questions have been answered. But I think we have like 150, 200 people on every time we do this, and yes, it is impossible to answer every single question. So I think perhaps that's what we should do. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
I feel really bad because I think we're ignoring them.
So I think what we can do, is go through the last month, find out all the questions. How many questions and answers do we manage to get through?
Today we've got through about a third, I think.
A third, yeah. Okay, so I think that's what we should do after we've done 4. I think, but
I don't like to miss people out in case.
No, I know.
Just go through them in order. Try to be.
So that's what we're going to do. Okay, I think we've got a month. We've done this is the 4th one now we've done. The 3rd one, is it?
I think so.
Okay, so what we're going to do, once we get a month's lot, we've got 4 of these. What we will do then is go through, find out all the questions we could possibly do, and then see how many more broadcasts we can do. It won't be live. It'll just be purely your answers to your questions. We'll put your names on the bottom of the description so you can see if your question is going to be answered, and we will certainly do our best. But yeah, it's a good question. Good question to a question. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we will go through. Last question, I think we got about 1 or 2 minutes left.
Well, Bully has noticed your new pet rock.
My bit of rock. Yeah, I found it.
Does the pet rock have a name?
It's not really. It's just a bit of no. To be honest, I found it and I remember saying, "Oh, put a nice bit of rock by there." It doesn't have a name. No.
Okay, Chris would like to know what's in the glasses at G&T.
No, that was water this time. I usually use this, but then when I drink, it makes a bit of a noise, so I stopped doing that. But no, that's a good one. Perhaps next time I'll. All right then. So thank you everybody for coming on. It's we're pretty much an hour. Yeah, okay, so thank you all for coming on this afternoon. Do so much appreciate it. Some questions I couldn't answer. The marker seat one, very good question. I don't know, I'll have to look into that and come back to you. The temperature for the furnace to get really fine detail. The gentleman there, I'm gonna have to go back and come back to you on that one and find out exactly what my furnace goes to. But yeah, I'll do a bit more research into that as well. You okay, Louise? Yeah, that's okay, good. Okay, so everybody, thank you very much for joining Louise and myself today. Thank you very much for the questions. Hope those answers have helped in some way. Next week, we're going to be doing another question and answer. It will be half an hour later than what this one is. So we will start at 3:30 instead of 3 o'clock. So don't come on at 3 o'clock expecting it, because we'll be a little bit later. 3:30 tomorrow. No. 3:30 next week. So join Louise and myself for that. But thank you for the questions. Get your questions ready. Come on a few minutes beforehand. If you want me to show you any tools or any equipment, come on beforehand. I can always go and get some tools or do some drawings in the meantime, so it's ready when we come live. And I do apologize if we haven't answered your questions, but we will go through them all and produce a few films where we do answer as many questions as we possibly can. So thank you very much. I should say, pass you over to Louise now. She can say goodbyes.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much for coming on, and we will all see you very soon, but 3:30 in 1 week's time. Everybody, take care. Thank you for coming on.